Our first presenter is Aaisha. She's the manager of the archival services at the College of Charleston's Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. In this position, she is responsible for collections development, public programming, instruction, reference, and administrative duties. She's been involved in a number of professional associations, including the Society of American Archivists, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Her research interests include African American history, digital preservation, censorship, and community archiving.
So once I saw Black Panther multiple times, multiple times you've seen the film, it became clear to me that there are a lot of symbols within the film that represents history, legacy, memory, and culture preservation. So this is one of the first shots we get of Wakanda. This is when T'Challa comes back to see his family and to bury his father and take on the mantle of Black Panther. And so this is when this scene came on the screen at the movies, it was very palpable excitement about this scene and what kind of future and stories this community can tell. And then we learn more about the community and the nations of Wakanda and who T'Challa, aka Black Panther, is, and really the history of the heart-shaped herb that the powers of the Black Panther comes through. And it tells the story at the beginning of the film about how these nations came together through the herb and how it's connecting and protection of the community. Throughout the film, though, you can see there's tug of war between access to vibranium, the metal or the alloy here that powers a lot of what's going on in Wakanda and protects Black Panther in his suit that's created by his sister Shuri. So questions throughout the film that I hope to try to get everyone's questions through today is talking about what is special about Wakanda, what is special about history and legacies, where does this power come from, and most importantly, who has access to these histories? So this is about three-way legacy making. This kind of chart, because of my framework understanding community archives and how they've developed over time. You have community-started archives, which was started by community members and grassroots efforts. And the institutional starter archives, where institutions sees the gaps in their collection and tries to rectify those issues. And then you have a partnership between a community organization, a community members, and an institution. And all of these have benefits and challenges to them, and they can be physical or digital in instance. I want to just point out the items in bold. I want to talk about community-started archives and archivists as people. A lot of recent activism within the archive world has come across with archivists who come from communities, have seen there's an issue and want to document what's happening in society. And so I want to point that archivists as communities, not just as practitioners, but as coming from a particular point of view perspective. And then you have an institutional starts records. It can be challenging because they might not know the institutional and community hierarchies and knowing where to go to, and that can stumble and create blocks in creating an archive. When you enter into a partnership, it is important to do a memo understanding to really outline expectations and to acknowledge any kind of power dynamics. As we learned earlier, the first panel, there are many ways our communities document themselves without any kind of archive. And it's important, the recent SAA conference in Washington, D.C., there were several sessions about communities not needing archivists, that we need them more than we need them. That makes sense, yes. And so it's the region of biases of wanting to go into like a saver complex to preserve and document these histories when they're already being documented in different ways. And so these are a couple of ways that African Americans and many other cultures have worked to document themselves in past histories along through textiles, through artifacts, through clothing, and even the built environment. So where I currently work at is the Avery Research Center of African History and Culture at the College of Charleston. And this is started basically as a community archive where the community is the alumni of Avery. It was originally a normal school that worked to educate African American after the Civil War to become teachers. In the 1980s, alumni of Avery approached the College of Charleston to really encourage them to purchase the buildings and to start an archive for African American history and documenting the South Carolina Low Country Black experiences. And and these people who are alum operate as a board to our current institution. So we run the library system at the college, and so we report to the library dean, but we also have the advisory board, executive board, that helps us stay in touch with the community needs and issues. And they also work as an advocate for us. And so they're able to do things and say things to people that we cannot do as state employees. And so that is very important. So as we've collected materials, one of our collections, the Sweetgrass Baskets, this is Sweetgrass Baskets were used on plantations by enslaved Africans who brought the transition over from the from the continent when they were working on the plantations with rice. Over the years, they've kind of transitioned from more decorative entities, like the basket you see in the middle. Miss Mary Jackson, well-renowned basket maker, created that basket. And then we have Cesar Johnson, was a more traditional, older style basket. And these baskets are very important to the South Carolina Low Country area because these are where the plantations were for rice. But development has happened, and access to the sweetgrass items to make the baskets have been very limited. And so there's ways that they're working on now to cultivate the grass to make these baskets, and to originally in South Carolina was a road that they were selling the baskets on, but due to development, that access has become more dangerous. And so now they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the Sweetgrass Basket stands that are currently there. Ms. Jackson, we had a meeting with her last week actually, talking about the history of our collection and how it came to be. And one of our colleagues, Dale Rosengarten, she was one of the spearheading of getting the collections to Avery. And the way that she was able to do that was through Mary. Mary told her that you can't do this without me. You couldn't. They won't talk to you otherwise. And so that was, how to build that trust that we were asked about earlier, is kind of get that pivotal person in the community to buy into what you're trying to do. Miss Mary also mentioned that there was differences in how Sweetgrass baskets are made. If you don't know, she can tell right away who makes a basket because of the kind of sweetgrass that they use and where they came from, because people on the islands made it differently than the people on the uplands or in a different town over, because they access different kind of baskets and different kind of sweetgrass items. So these are 2 exhibit catalogs that were done by the McKissick, the row upon row, and then grassroots were done by Avery. So over the years, there's also been tension about who should be taught how to do sweetgrass basket making. Some people think it needs to be taught within the community and not accessible to other individuals, especially if they're white. But there are other ones that think it should be taught in order to pass on the history to future generations. So as we continue to document and work within this community of African Americans in Lowcountry, another pivotal part of history and heritage is food. And so now we are working on, we meaning the staff at Avery, is working on trying to document food waste. And so learning what we did with the baskets, we're kind of trying to transition that to the food aspect of the culture. Before I came to Avery, I was at the Chicago State University as a university archivist, and so I want to talk about that project as well. So this is Ms. Pat Bearden. She was the co-founder of an organization called ISDSA, which operated in 1996, and they worked to collect histories of people who can track the descendants to enslavement. And so they got images and some story genealogy from individuals across the country to document these experiences. Their money came from the state of Illinois to get that buy-in. In 2015, she approached me about doing a partnership and digitizing items from their collection to put it on our kind of DM site and then eventually for DPLA. I had to take this to my dean of libraries to get buy-in, but similar to Trevor, we are a public institution that in our mission has about sustainability, empowerment, community engagement, and so this was a very, linked to that mission statement. So that was pretty good buy-in and acceptance of this proposal. Once that was achieved, we had to do training with her on scanning equipment, which she came to our library to do once a week for about a year to 2 years to do this project. It's still ongoing. As you know, I did transition to no longer being there, but the new archivist has been working with this project to do it. In hindsight, there's probably things I could have done better to make the transition easier and the hands-off easier, and so we could talk about that in the Q&A if you have questions about that in terms of documentation and with metadata and everything. So as institutions come do's and don'ts, I'm doing don'ts first. Don't assume that you're an expert in the community's history. Memory can be very transitional. People often question about alternative facts and who has the real truth. And the answer really is, it's all true. It just matters of your perspective you come at it. And as archivists, we need just to collect it all and then let other people decide where the truth is. And don't privilege Western practices, ideology of wanting to preserve everything. Some people's histories should just die, and we should be okay with that. We just don't need to collect everything, and so that is kind of relearning of what what archivists do, the right to be forgotten, basically. And don't do it because it's trendy or the cool thing to do right now. Really have a commitment and authenticity that I mentioned earlier. It comes through when you approach communities. And one part of the do is know your history or institution. What kind of things that your institution has done to communities previously, and you may not think it's your fault, which probably you weren't there, possibly, but you need to recognize that that feeling is in the community and to acknowledge it and to even apologize for it and to say, we're going to do better. And that's how you're going to make inroads. Also, giving back to the community and descriptive practices, that you may have records in your archive already documenting this community, but how it's described, you can't find it more accessibly. And so think about going back through records and seeing what you can find to pull out communities into your histories. And so I don't want to end this presentation talking about the people of the archivists of color that are often asked to do this work. So when we talk about hiring practices, we also, it's the thing that you're going to hire a person of color and then expect them to go into communities and do this work. And it's not easy as that, because they are not monolithic. There are hierarchies and concerns that you may not even be aware of because you're not of that community. But the person of color recognizes that. And so there are going to be microaggressions that they feel from communities, even when they go into communities, and they're going to feel microaggressions coming from their colleagues at the library. And so really the emotional labor that goes into this work is very heavy, and to acknowledge that. The issue of Killmonger, they're all Wakandan, but they all definitely come from a different perspective, right? And trying to understand those perspectives in terms of history, in terms of perspective and future. So at the end of Black Panther, and we get a little bit of this in Infinity Wars, what's the future of Wakanda? We're not sure yet. People felt like I should say myself, I felt kind of at the Infinity Wars, and Wakanda basically is destroyed. There's very damage happened to Wakanda. And so I kind of think about communities and how you let people in to do, save the world, but then we end up destroying ourselves in the process. And so we think about communities, and you go into, make sure you do better. You don't want to go in and do harm to communities. I also want to say that when you undertake projects and community and memory projects like this, it's important to, as a result of all this, we get to have representation of new people, of new audiences. And if we want to be sustainable as archivists and librarians, we need to make sure that the communities are documented in our histories, because they won't support you if you're closed from state budget funds. They don't care, because they're not going to be impacted. But if their collection is there, if their people are there, then they will care. They will fight for you to stay open. And so just trying to build that relationship is important as we go forth. Thank you so much.
Our second speaker today will be Julian Richardson, public historian and founder and president of the HistoryMakers. She has a unique and diverse background in theater, television production, and the cable television industry. She is a magna cum laude graduate of Brandeis University, where she double majored in theater arts and American studies. After conducting oral histories on the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes, Richardson attended the Harvard Law School. After graduation, she worked as a corporate lawyer, prior to serving in the early 1980s as the cable administrator for the City of Chicago Office of Cable Communications. There she established the Chicago Cable Commission, the city's regulatory body. She went on to found Shop Chicago, a regionally based home shopping channel. Driven to start the HistoryMakers out of a strong desire to make a difference and to leave a living legacy, the University of Illinois at Chicago's Great Cities Institute named Julianna Richardson its Vernon D. Jarrett Fellow. In 2002, she served on the board of the Henry Hampton Collection at the Washington University. She currently sits on the Honors Council of Lawyers for the Creative Arts and was appointed in 2011 to Comcast NBC Universal African American Diversity Council. In 2012, she was awarded an honorary doctorate in humanities by Howard University, and in 2014, she served as the commencement speaker for Dominican University, who also awarded her an honorary doctorate in the humanities. In 2014, Black Enterprise Magazine awarded Richardson its 2014 Legacy Award, its highest recognition of women's achievement. That same year, Richardson was profiled in American Masters, The Boomer List, a PBS documentary and exhibition at the museum in Washington, D.C. She served as the commencement speaker for Brandeis University's 65th annual commencement in 2016, where she also received an honorary doctorate of humane letters.
Good morning. I thought Aaisha's presentation was excellent, and I want to say, Michael, I thought your beginning statements were really wonderful and very appropriate. And the subject that we have today of archives, memory, and identity, I really believe are embodied in our project. This project, the HistoryMakers, began at my dining room table 18 years ago. And we've grown to be the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive. I want to just show you how the archive works. But before I do that, I just want to talk about the importance of partnerships, which was on Aaisha's chart when it comes with minority serving projects trying to gain traction in a majority serving world, which is what we have been for the last 18 years. Partnerships have been absolutely critical. John Unsworth, when he stood up here, talked about our partnership, which began back in what I call the dark years of our project, which is about the years of 2008, when we forged a collaboration with the University of Illinois and their library school where he was dean. That saved our project in hindsight. If we had not had that and the resources of a world-class library school, where I actually then met Daniel Pitney, who was the creator of EAD and EACCPF. It was that partnership that sort of wowed the Library of Congress that we were advanced to even have both EAD and EACCPF finding aids. The Library of Congress was a seminal moment also in our project, which I'll go over a little bit more. We have an amazing, amazing partnership with them. But our partnerships first began with Carnegie Mellon University, which is, they've worked with us for 17 years, almost with no funding, and are as aggressive about our growth and our success as we can be. The other thing is that I see both Monica Rue and Sandra Phoenix, and we are forming a collaboration with the HBCU Alliance. That's extremely important to a collection like ours because at the basis, at the time that our collection, what our collection represents, a lot of the people we interview come out of the HBCU, the majority of the HBCU community. So there are a lot of things that we want to see. So I want to show you what, if I can do this here, what the history, shoot. Okay, what the HistoryMakers is. So we, this is the database that John spoke of. We've done a lot of work. This is what Carnegie Mellon created for us. I'm going to go here to someone you know. We interviewed about, oops, what is going on here? Sorry, hold on a second. Hold on, sorry. This is in this mouse. We interviewed Barack Obama when he was Illinois State Senator. And the thing about the digital archive, I'll explain a little bit more, but we interviewed him here. And
your favorite color?
My favorite color? I don't really have a favorite color. Maybe blue? Sure, why not? Blue?
Your favorite time of year?
That is easier. Probably late summer, early fall.
Your favorite vacation destination?
Bali.
And your favorite phrase or saying? Do you have one?
I'm tired. I was sleepy.
so, you know, he was actually Illinois State Senator at that time. That's 2001 when when he was starting to run for office for the presidency. The campaign came by to check out the interview, so I think it checked out. And actually, his narrative is pretty consistent. I want to take you, there are a lot of, I don't want to go into this. a lot, but there are a lot of, darn it, I'm having trouble navigating this. Hold on. There's a lot in this collection. I'm showing things that are, were new, early interviews that we did. William Warfield was married to Leontine Price. He was a well-known tenor. The thing about people in the classical arts, black people in the classical arts, is that they always were forced to do Porgy and Bess. Some people, Etta Moulton talks about how her voice was destroyed. But this, we often ask people at the end of the interview to, if they're singers, to do something. So this is what we asked them.
When I was doing Porgy, doing Showboat at the Vienna Volksopera, I was there doing it in repertory with Porgy and Bess and with Showboat. And the Showboat production was in German. Alte Strom, uralte Strom, muss was wissen und sagt doch gar nichts, fließt nur schweigend, nur immer schweigend vorbei. Muss nicht schuften, nicht Baumwoll pflügen, das tun die anderen mit krummen Rücken. Der alte Strom, fließt nur schweigend vorbei. Du und ich, wir schwitzen Blut, buckelvoll striemen, ja rot von Glut, schleppt den Kahn, hebt den Stein, trink ein Schluck zu viel und man sperrt sich ein. Ganz vergeben, man muss verderben, bemüht des Leben, hab Angst zu sterben, der alte Strom, fließt nur schweigend vorbei.
Thank you. Okay, I want to go to my PowerPoint. So with our collection, basically people never die. The collection has grown to be the largest African-American video oral history collection that has ever existed. We've done now 3,100 interviews in 413 cities and towns, and so this has been a project of extreme passion, and we would not be here if it weren't for partnerships. And a lot of people have helped make this happen with a small staff. I do want to say one other thing before I begin this PowerPoint presentation, because we do oral histories, and I was a young girl, a 9-year-old, who could not reconcile that people would say all these things about Booker T. Washington. No, Carter G. Woodson. God, what is wrong with me? Peanuts. George Washington Carver and his peanuts. I'm sorry, thank you. Oh my God, I could not reconcile that he could have said all these things with peanuts when all we had been were slaves. And the question of identity and value is being debated in society here, who has value, who has not, who has contributed, who has not. And I really have a request here for anyone who is in charge of an archive, that we need to be in extreme partnership, because as I stand here, we're losing most of the 20th century of African American history. When I set out to interview people, so maybe about 7 years ago, I started to ask people what they were doing with their paper collections. We don't do paper, so that was not an issue with us. There's no conflict of interest. And so they virtually, literally, less than 1% were even thinking about papers. And I can give you lots of well-known names, Vernon Jordan, James Earl Jones. I mean, I could go down the whole list of people that we have interviewed that are not even thinking. Danny Glover said he was not valuable enough. I mean, I keep hearing that over and over again. And then on the other side, you know, we were also trying to get our digital archive that I saw you went to universities, and many of them dismissive of us, you know, sort of sit around, or this is sort of Black history, and, you know, and where was our place? But at the, and so what I would do to counteract that a lot of times would say, okay, so what do you have in your collection about the Black experience? And what I've been finding is they're virtually, we are in a crisis. There's virtually nothing saved of the 20th century. And so this has become my mission to really sort of talk about, because if we don't, we're going to lose probably the most significant period in African American history that really has existed in the 20th century. So here, okay. You saw the digital archive. We love it that David Levering Lewis said that it was an inestimable treasure trove for historians, and we hope that that will come to be. As I said, it began at my dining room table. Now we're up to, I think yesterday we picked up Northeastern University, but we are moving, and our goal is to get into 200 universities. Public libraries are also important to us. We started with Chicago Public Library and added Milwaukee Public Library and Salt Lake County Library, and the Schomburg just sent a wonderful email that John read this morning. We are an interesting intersection between the digital humanities and the public humanities. Digital humanities, a priest named Roberto Busa. This is the 1940s that both the digital humanities and public humanities, but he wanted to index all the works of Thomas Aquinas. The father of, so oral history is basically public humanities. The father is a man named Alan Evans out of Columbia University with a world-renowned institute. He wanted to make sure that he recorded leaders. He was working on the biography of President Grover Cleveland and was concerned with the turn of the century that people were not writing letters. And that resonates within our project also. We're the largest attempt to record the Black experience since the WPA Slave Narratives. Our goal was to be, we're a 501c3. We wanted to preserve and make widely accessible the untold stories of both well-known and unsung African Americans. And we wanted to do that one person at a time, creating a priceless archive, meaning it could not be replicated. This is where we're housed, 2014. This is David Packard. He loves moving image archives. We love him because he created this facility. $163 million gift from the federal government that created that facility, and that's where we are housed, and there's film going back to the late 1800s there. Why was this a solid partnership? And actually, Aaisha talked about the importance of partnerships, but also MOUs. And so we were a distinct and unique collection. We complemented the existing Library of Congress collection. We were well organized. They said we were the most organized project that they had ever had come into the Library of Congress. We had full intellectual control, fully digitized using the same San Masolo system that they had, and we held all rights to our material, meaning everyone who interviews with us, we won't do an interview unless they have a release form. What we gained was this is a nationally recognized, they're moving image experts, proper facilities, cold vault storage, and they are our permanent repository. Now, I do want to say just real quickly that it took us 3 years to get to a final agreement. They came to me and said, we don't want your tapes. I said, hold it. No, where are my tapes going? And so, and then they wanted my digital rights. And I said, no, because I want to do this digital archive. So we worked that out. So they are a permanent repository, but they also took our tapes. And it took them a long time to get the tapes on the shelves. We had to have a celebration. The other thing is that we are piped by 75 miles of fiber optic cable to downtown. And then we couldn't have known at that point in time that Carla Hayden would be the Librarian of Congress. And it almost seems magical. In many ways, the WPA were housed in the same place as the WPA Slave Narratives. So the stories of the enslaved and the stories of the descendants of the formerly enslaved are housed under one roof. And then we have one of our history makers who we had already interviewed, now as the 14th Librarian of Congress. How do we define history maker? We define them, the first having the leadership theme. People who've made significant accomplishments in his or her own life. They may be well-known or not. And also with the 2000 NEH grant, a group of historians helped us with the second definition, and that was people who were associated with a particular movement, association, or event or time that's important to the African American community. So we could not interview Langston Hughes. He had long died, but we interviewed Raul Abdul, who had been his assistant for 25 years. Our goal was 5,000. How did I get to that goal? I wanted to be double the number of WPA slave narratives, and 10% of the Shoah, the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. Steven Spielberg had done 52,000 interviews by the time that we got started. We wanted to expose the collection to the widest audience possible, preserve this collection for years to come, and donate it to a nationally recognized archive. The last two we've done, the first two we are still working on. We have tons of content in the collection: Black feminism, theology, STEM. We've interviewed 211 of the nation's top scientists, foodways, filmmakers, Black arts movement, poetry, entrepreneurship, integration in public life. There are thousands and thousands of themes. Now, this right here shows the green is, we're housed in Chicago. That's where we started. So that's the most number of interviews, almost 600. New York is 400, DC about 400. The blue are where we are making things happen. In the red, we say that we want to be all blue by 2020. I do want to say, though, the thing is that we did not have any interviews in Mississippi until last year, but we had 10 in Salt Lake City because we've had to, we went to Salt Lake City years ago to do one of the AKA Grand Basilisks. We just, Alaska was read until a few months ago where we went. I had always wanted to do an Alaskan frontierswoman. She had been long dead, but that history, the Black history there, where a lot of people think there are no Blacks in Alaska, but that history goes back to the 1800s. The other thing I want to point out about the collection is that there are more men than women. Even though I'm a woman, I can't explain that, but we need to get that corrected. And people are saying now that maybe if the collection were started now, that it would be reversed. In terms of the collection, 612 have died. Of those 612, I would say less than 1% have ever written their own autobiography or had a biography written about them. The same thing about their papers. And if you look at 70 and above, which represents 2/3 of the collection, we will represent the most significant recording of them. So let me give the example of Isaac Hayes. When he passed away, his agent called me, and I didn't know who he was, and he was asking to see the interview. And he said, afterwards, he said, I knew Isaac my whole life, but I've never heard the things that I heard in that interview. We do what are called life oral history interviews. We have always started with 15 different categories. We had Katherine Johnson, the person who was featured in Hidden Figures, and she could talk, and there's a 3-hour interview, not like she was rolled out when she came out during the Academy Awards. You'll see here that, education is double counted, so that's there. Civics, we've done okay, though there are a lot of young activists coming onto the scene that we will like to record. Business, we just got funding for. Media, we're okay, but going down, those are categories that are missing. And when you'll see music, sports, and entertainment, we thought that they had been well covered in the Black community and found out that that was just not the case. And that's it. Thank you.
Our third speaker is María Verónica San Martín, a studio artist at the Whitney Museum, ISP. She's a Chilean-born, New York-based artist working in printmaking, artist books, installation, sculpture, and performance. The subject matter of her work departs from violence and dictatorship Chile, 1973 to 1999, vis-a-vis the United States and Nazism involvement in that violence, addressing memory as a pivotal factor for the understanding of the neoliberal globalized present. San Martín has had exhibitions at the Museum of Memory and Human Rights in Chile, Brick Arts Media New York, the Cantor Art Center, Stanford University, California, the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Germany, and is preparing 2 solo shows for the Chilean National Archive and for the Meermano Museum in Netherlands. Her work is in the collections of the Pompidou Center, the New York Public Library, and the Walker Museum, among others.
Good morning. Buenos días. What I'm going to do is to try to share as much as my work is. So I'm going to divide my presentation into 2 parts. The first will be my previous work, and then I'm going to present my current project called Dignidad, Dignity, which is an exhibition that will be held at the National Archives in Chile. So I'm a Chilean-born artist specialized in printmaking, artist books, installations, media, and performance art. Considering art as a tool of social change, my principal aim is to question power relations in the world order, creating in the viewer the ideas that things could be otherwise and thus the desire of change. More specifically, the subject matter of my work departs from violence in dictatorship Chile, 1973-1990, vis-a-vis the United States' involvement in that violence, addressing memory as a pivotal factor for the understanding of the neoliberal globalized present. For me, printmaking is not just a technique, but rather an aesthetic, a conceptual medium that I use to explore further the theme of memory through a variety of representation strategies. In this sense, the experience, and thus the process of creating an etching, which involves washing the stencil excess and carving out of a wood of a surface, creates an image that disappears and then reappears printed on the paper. This process, its temporality involving invisibility and visibility, reminds demands in the public spaces related to the searching of truth, yet not of reconciliation, as reconciliation's aims is to close the issue of the disappeared and human rights struggles in Chile and, by extension, in other southern countries under dictatorial regimes from 1960 through the late 1980s. My work thus migrates from the public spaces mottos such as "Where are they?", "Dónde están?", "Neither forgive, not forget", "No olvidar y no perdonar", and that they appear alive, que aparezcan vivos, inviting the viewer to the connect in the present made out of the contingency of the past, with the politics of reconstitution by means of faces, names, memory sites, and declassified archives regarding U.S.-Chilean relations during the Cold War. In turn, performance is pivotal in the exhibiting of my work, that is, the interaction between the body and the voice to narrate a story considering the ruins in the formation of the present. Born during the dictatorship and coming to age in the so-called return to democracy in the early 90s, I'm a second-generation witness of the regime's atrocities, and a first-generation artist experiencing the legacy of the dictatorship in the collective body. It is from this perspective that I speak, giving a testimony of a present built upon the legacy of the dictatorship. In this sense, both my books and my performance reject the modernist idea of a progressive history with a fixed past, and thus immanent meaning. In so doing, I participate within the spaces created when my two-dimensional works transform into three-dimensional imaginary sites of memory, as my books and engravings are also sculptures. In other words, the deployments of the books are there, and their various form of assembly ends up overcoming the traditional format of a codex, becoming sculptures that I call memorials. And these memorials are not there to be contemplated in the distance, but rather to be touched, mobilized once and again, inviting the viewer to participate in the experience of the works and its special and temporal possibilities. An important aspect of the experience of the work and an important aspect of the performance is to learn from the audience experience, to exchange thoughts. My recent series, Moving Memorials, an ongoing project of traveling exhibition program and event I began with 2012 in conjunction with Booklyn Inc., exemplary shows all the above. Composed of several artist books in constant transformation, the series, its mobility rejects a fixed past and as idealistic progress, calling instead for an open book and an open narrative, creating spaces to activate the viewer's affects through the experience of silence. That very silence then transforms into a metaphoric voice into the present. The books forming the series are El Siglo, Militaris Betrays the Country, In Their Memory, Human Rights Violations in Chile, Marches, Students' Mobilizations in Chile, Memory and Landscape, Unveiling the Historic Truth of Chile, Indignity and Resistance in the Foothills of the Andes, a case study of Villa Grimaldi, The Right to Know, Silo, Room, and Book Installation, Make the Economy Scream. So this is The Right to Know under the U.S. Sky installation. This is how the portraits looked in a box installation, light box. Some of the exhibitions. And this is a work of the same installation that I showed them later at the Center for Book Arts. And then this is in an art book fair showing this giant book. So then this is the half of the presentation, and then I'm gonna go through the second half, which is about the Dignidad Project. This project I have been working on for the last 2 years. So it's been shown the first part at the Center for Book Arts in New York. Then it was shown at the Art Space Gallery as part of the Whitney Independent Study Program. And now it's going to the National Archives in Chile, and then we'll go to the Museum Hermano in The Hague, Netherlands. Dignity is an exhibition based on secret telephone documents about Colonia Dignidad, an infamous commune in southern Chile that was operated as a torture center by former German Nazi military officers and the Chilean DINA, National Intelligence Directorate of Pinochet dictatorship. Found in 2012 by the ex-colono and lawyer Winfried Hempel, the audios reveals for the first time to the public conversations between Paul Schaeffer and other Nazi agents during 1978. Through sculpture, sound, performance, text, and a selection of historical archives, the installation reveals a complex system of codes and transcontinental action that culminate in crimes against minors and opponents to the Chilean civic military dictatorship. This project is in collaboration with the Association for Memory and Human Rights, Colonia Dignidad, Winfried Hempel, and the Chilean National Archive. So this is how the project started. Winfried Hempel, who was born inside of the Colonia Dignidad, found 4 years ago these magnetic tapes on top of the ceiling of Colonia Dignidad, and this is the tape that has the audio contained with sensitive information about internal conversations of Nazi agents between Chile, Peru, and Germany in 1978. This CD belongs to a part of 55 unpublished CDs. This is number 1945, which Winfred gave it to me just for an art purpose. So they recorded telephone conversations that went from Peru and Bolivia by Agent Kurt Schenelkamp, then went to Germany, where Hugo Barr received that information, and then they sent it to Chile, to the Colonia Dignidad, which was located in southern Chile. So then the militaries and Paul Schaeffer got the information. That's me with Winfred working on the documents and the translation of the audio. And this is a little bit of part of the translation of the audio, which will be also shown at the exhibition as a record and archival investigation. So you can see here how, for example, this banal language converts and turns into code language between the agents. So for example, they were talking about weddings that meant war, or when toys meant guns, or where children's meant militaries, and where playground meant Air Force. So this is something that we were, radiographs meant images. Inside of the colony, there were like a lot of banal language that militaries were talking that then was recorded as a common language. This is my different sketches and drawings when I start planning how to represent something that shouldn't be even written in the history. So as for this project, I couldn't draw any line, so I couldn't make printmaking for this project. I ended up making something based much more in an abstraction. So those are my kind of studies of the swastika, which originally was a symbol of peace, destroyed and taken by the Nazis. And so those are just three-dimensional drawings that help me figure out how can I proceed. And then I discovered or went through an exploration of different shapes throughout one specific construction, which is these 25 squares of metal that are connected with hinges that deconstruct and reconstruct symbols of power, such as the cross, the swastika, the chakana, but also represent spaces of segregation, tunnels, bunkers, what happened above the earth, what happened under the earth. So then I start working with a musician in New York to divide the audio and connect it with 4 different speakers. So one speaker, each speaker represents one of these 3 countries that were involved in this espionage audio. So then we start working with QR codes. And then this was the first time I showed it in public at the Center for Book Arts. So how the sculptor can be turned into many different sculptors. And this is my research that I had at my studio at the Whitney Museum that helped me developing what was going on and what's the best way to represent Colonia Dignidad. This is an exhibition that we had as part of the Independent Studio program. So this is my first sketch of how I intended to show it in order to communicate as the best as I could. So I ended up doing like a whole installation made of a performance, an audio immersive, and a sculpture. And then now we're gonna play a little bit of the performance video. We're going to move quickly to the center or middle of the performance so you can see how the work moves in itself.
Alles gut fahren. Bietet hier kommen, wir wollen Kisten packen. Wir kriegen nächste Woche Mittwoch den Pickelhut. Nach uns verpacken und sonst läuft alles ganz gut. Der ist schon kann ein kleines Muster schicken. Ja, das haben wir ein kleines Muster schicken. Am Samstag das Urlaub abgebrochen. Und Christine ist ja wahrscheinlich auch jetzt in die Gegend unterwegs, nicht? Ja. Muss zur Ankunft fahren. Ja, ist ja verständlich. Onkel wollte gerne wissen, wie es dem Urlaub geht und unterwegs. Was soll ich ihm erzählen? Ja, hast verstanden? Hallo? Ja, gut. Hallo? Am 6. und 8. verladen weiter 3 Kinder.
So then after showing that part of the performance, this is how the installation I think we have to stop the noise. Can you download the noise, the video? No more noise, no more audio. Kill the audio. It's still, the audio is like, if you can put stop on the Vimeo, please. Thank you. So this is how the installation looked like after the performance. Thank you. And I'm going to go very quick. This is the wall with the ephemeral material, translation, photographs, what the place is today, which is an agricultural capitalism that is still working under a new name. And then this is the National Archive with the Colonia Dignidad archives that let us entry and see for the first time what is the nature of that archive. So we went inside. This is some found names of intellectual enemies like the poet Pablo Neruda and Los Parra Folklore Band. Those are hand drawings of the political persecuted by the agents of Colonia Dignidad. Some fichas, personal files. This is an army major description of his practice inside of Colonia. Another member of the DINA. He worked at the intelligence service at the southern central area, one of the greatest repressors during the dictatorship, some Nazi passports. This is Boris Weisfeiler case, an American disappeared and still disappeared during the dictatorship in Chile in 1985. This is Boris' case, an open archive, international press. He was a mathematical from Boston. And this is a 3-montage of the Dignidad exhibition at the National Archives. So we are working on increasing the size of the sculptures, and this is how the exhibition narrative will work. And that's it, how it's gonna look in this October 2018. Thank you.
We have about 20 minutes for questions before lunch. So step right up to a microphone, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Vilas. I'm an undergraduate student here. I had a question for Maria and the relationship between historical narratives and the current day politics in Chile. It seems like one of the biggest political cleavages in voters now is whether or not they supported the Allende regime or the Pinochet regime. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to how your art takes history and makes it into the present, and perhaps the relationship between history and the current political moment in Chile.
So the so-called dictatorship in Chile is something that is still right there, since we are still living the constitution made in 1981. So that's why I said that we are currently living a neoliberal present tense. The issues of memory are still something not resolved, since everything is kind of getting delayed. What I kind of work and try to do is to make social conscious and then try to bring the past into the present tense to then see the future more open. I don't know if I really addressed.
Thank you for sharing that. This is also for Maria, is that correct? Your pieces, first of all, I like the way you use art to tell what I think is, something that's very tragic and painful. But one of the things that I would like for you to speak about is how do people respond to that? Because sometimes when you think about archival work and the work that we do, we try to uplift the best parts of history and not necessarily the ugly part of history. And sometimes people don't even want to even acknowledge or be a participant of the ugly part of history. So how do people respond to your work?
Mm-hmm. Of course, I have been feeling different feelings and experiences throughout a different audience. I have been showing this in Europe, in the United States, and my country. And of course, my country is the most difficult audience because you are talking to the people who really experienced the human rights violations, although I think that, of course, I'm not the only artist who are representing this pain through art and how this could be a little bit of beauty, But as for me, is how you can give dignity to a past that is also like a sense that all as a community and as a country is still living. So at some point they all ended up, not all, but most of the people ended up giving me like a thank you to just put this on top of the table and bring the debates in the current present. Of course, I have been also doing first that I can see people who just pass through the work and they don't even see it, while there are others who even start crying. They were like involved in some part with cantautores or like from, especially in the West Coast, I have been receiving at the Codex book fair like a super well response. So I think it mainly is super different depending where are you showing, but nowadays if you are kind of progressive, then you would think that this is part of our purpose as humans.
Hi, I'm Felissa Mitchell, and I'm here with University of Virginia Library. I have an anecdote and a question. One of my brothers, is this for you, Julianna, at first? One of my late brother's best friends is a man named Arnold Bray. And he's Arnold Bray, right? And he was a general. And then he popped up, and I thought, he's really something. It was really surprising to me he's really a big deal. There's a General Arnold Bray who was one of my brothers, so that's my anecdote. My question is for you, the next question. One is Wakanda. One of the things that came out of that movie was the fact that there is so little merchandising with respect to Black Panther. Do you think it's going to be different with the next movie?
make sure
I guess what I'm saying is that there were no dolls, there were no tie-ins for Happy Meals, nothing like that you see in most blockbuster films.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think a lot of the, in Chicago, I was last month, they had WakandaCon, and that was very interesting because I felt that was, there are a lot of like they're beginning more African-American comic cons happening around the country. But this one was focused on Black Panther, but as they're planning for the future of 2019 and throughout the next couple years, there was a idea that they're going to call WakandaCon, and they're going to change the name of it and broaden it. But I think it was interesting to me for it to call WakandaCon this year because when you got there to the event, there were a lot of like underground like shirts. So like I felt it created like this Black economic enclave where Black people were creating this Black art. And so even though like big name corporations were not buying into this, the Black community saw it as a way to empower themselves. And so they're like at Etsy or other online shops, they were like Wakanda Forever. Shirts about Shuri, shirts about science technology, and so the other one I think that was interesting, and what I did see in stores was a little figurine. I can't remember who created it, but there are a little bit more. I don't think people expected Black Panther. By people, I mean white people. Didn't think it would be a film that people would resonate with, and people, even the film screening came out, people came dressed as different characters of Black Panther, and so that was that longing for representation on the screen. And as 2018, there's a lot of think pieces about what's going to happen to the future of Black film. And I'm not convinced that this will be a nadir of Black film. But maybe I might prove it wrong. I hope so. But I hopefully Black Panther 2 and with the Avengers 4 coming out next year, it'll be interesting to see what kind of merchandise. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Barbara Wall. I'm a professor here at the University of Virginia in the School of Nursing, and I'm also the director of a nursing history center here. I have a question really, I guess, for all three of you. We're writing grants to get the oral histories of some African-American nurses here in the community. And and this is a specific question, for a line item budget, Aaisha, I think you mentioned paying community members as consultants. How much? What's the going rate? I have no idea.
Well, how much do you value the contribution? How much do you value the contribution? I think relatively, if you're going to apply for a grant, like it's $28, how often, if they had to take time off of work to come to your meetings in the middle of the day, if they have to pay for childcare to come for your meetings, what kind of compensation will you be offering to them to do that? Because it is, part of their own story. They'll have to share it with you. And so I think just trying to think about that. And it's great that you guys are doing this project, and I wish you the best. Mm-hmm.
We don't pay our subjects, and I think that there are different ways of paying people. I know that a lot, like in the 70s, when there was the, what they call the democratization of oral histories, they were paying, and by the time we came around, people, there was no money for oral histories. Oral histories are now growing in popularity. So we established that from the beginning, but the thing that I would say is, are you going to respect that story? How I would say that, are you going to respect that person? And there are lots of ways that you pay respect. You pay respect by being prepared, not showing up to an interview, not research. You pay respect by the care that you take with that. And I think you also pay respect nowadays with how accessible you can make the story, but honoring people's wishes. So one of the things is that we will not, there are things that, while we try to get people to go deep in terms of their history and veer from what the party line would be, what they would tell everyone, we also, if there are things that they do not want to stay on tape, we will honor that. If we have been in a situation where the cameras were recording, where they were not supposed to be recording, we will honor that. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can show respect for things that are separate and apart from, paying.
I'd like to say that I enjoyed all the presentations as well. I'm most definitely a Black Panther fan. And you spoke about the Sweetgrass Baskets, and I had the privilege of taking a class. And when I asked the instructor, a woman in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, is there anything written about this? And she said, no, I'm teaching you, and then you tell this to somebody else. And we're going to grow this community in that way. We're going to talk to each other about that. So thanks for sharing. And Julianna, tell me a bit more about how folk are identified to participate with HistoryMakers. What is the process for selecting someone?
Okay.
Thank
you. So that's a question that I've always hated. Because, at the beginning, we didn't have a list. So it wasn't like, we tried sales gatherings and scholars together in different disciplines. But we didn't have a list, and so I always said, we were sourcing people. Now our list has grown to about 7,000, and we get recommendations from all kinds of different places. And, we're now starting to pull back and look at different categories and see what they really say. I want to say one thing, that the name of our organization says individuals, but it is a misnomer in terms of what the organization really is about. We're very much into what we're really after people's stories, and you don't know where the rich history lies. We have well-known people who they don't give as a historic interview, and then we have people that are lesser known that are really rich repositories of history. And so that's our process. So maybe we're selecting a little bit more now because it's an expensive process. But at the same time, the collection, the value of it is the intersection between all the stories. I mean, that's really where the value is. Speak. Yes.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Shoresh. I'm at James Madison University. And I had a question that is hopefully okay here. I know it's a little community archives-y, but Aaisha, you mentioned like the end of Infinity Wars. Hope everyone likes comics. By opening their doors and sharing their knowledge, they welcomed destruction onto themselves. And I know that this is a really contentious point with community archives partnering with institutions. And, Burgess Jewell has his perspective is often that is just inappropriate, that the community archives need to look to themselves, and that institutions can support by providing resources at the community and at the community archive. And I'm wondering if you all can speak about if and where you see an intersection in those partnerships between institutions and community archives that's authentic and respectful, but that does provide a wider range of research and scholarship and engagement.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that question. I think a really interesting, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the Hip Hop Archive out of Harvard just had an interview with the Kitchen Sisters.
That was so great.
Yes, I haven't listened to it yet, but I read about it, and I'm working on putting a trip home tomorrow. But between them at Harvard and at Cornell, they both have really good they have really good ways of intertwining the community of hip hop, which is like anti-establishment and very radical in its foundation. And to be archived at these two prestigious universities is quite interesting. But I think how they get around it is by hiring people from the community to work at those institutions. And they are very open to having community groups to actually use it and bringing in the artists themselves to talk about and to work with the collections. And so I think, and I definitely, Burgess is definitely a good scholar relating to community archive and fabulous, done a lot of fabulous work, him and Jared and Stacey Williams. You should know who they are, please Google them, awesome people. And though they have really good scholarship about, roles of institutions, and if you have the, capacity to do post-custodial work with community groups or lending your expertise or offering opportunities for communities to come in and learn about preserving and archiving, then please do so. But yeah, so that's my question.
Well, in Chile, it's a little bit different. We don't have special collections. We don't have so many archival places that has been even researched and have conclusions on what do they have because of different things, memory issues, funds, and a lot of other stuff. So for me I wish we can have like this kind of archival world that you value here. That's why I am here living in New York, researching from here, but with the distance to research my country. But this is totally part of the memory issue, so it's what it is.
And I would say that I have, I really feel, well, first of all, our project wouldn't be where it was if it weren't for partnerships. And those partnerships, they have, I would say my Carnegie Mellon partnership is probably the least contentious. There have been times when the partnerships have been quite contentious, where I had to, fight to really defend the value of the project, the focus of the project, the funding of the project. I mean, I've had to claw ourselves into funding. We basically are not grant funded. We've raised the collection that you see costs us $17 million. We've had to raise that too. That's not sustainable to do that. So the thing is that, so I have that thought. The other thing I have a thought, and this is when I'm looking at archives all around and very interested in collaborations between majority serving and minority serving institutions. But then the majority institutions don't even know they're African American alumni. They are invisible to them. And I can give chapter and verse. I was recently, talking at Yale. Yale has a very, they have of early American writers. They're sort of the godfather in many ways because they have James Weldon Johnson, Arna Bontemps, Richard Wright. But if you ask Yale right now what they are collecting, they can't tell you what they collect of the Black experience. And just recently, I had been approached by someone who has been on faculty there for 50 years. And I had convinced him that his collection should go to Yale because he had been there. He has 47 honorary doctorates. And literally the conversation I had with the library was bizarre at best. Here is someone who has worn Yale's banner for 50 years and they don't even know his name. So there is a lot of ignorance on behalf of majority institutions of the African American community. The African American community basically often talks about, do they have value? Do they have value? Do there things of value they never thought that they had value? And this is a complicated world that we sort of live in because archives are expensive. I mean, there's a lot of money. Decisions have to be made about what, what should be preserved, what should not be preserved. And I don't know how we reconcile these issues, but I really think it's positive that sessions like this are happening. I think it's not positive to see a room that is so lacking in diversity. And the fact is, when you look at archival training and even training in libraries, most of the people who come into the profession who are minorities are coming mainly in through grant-funded projects. And then there are these huge gaps. And I had been really focused on archives and not been so focused on libraries, and had a very interesting discussions with a group of recently librarians. And this has a lot to do with what is chosen to be processed, how things are interpreted, what people say about things, what they take from it, even, what is communicated about a project. I just heard a presentation from a scholar. Well, she called herself a scholar. She called herself a biographer of the first African American who attended Harvard University, a man named Richard Greener, whose things were found in Chicago. A trunk was found by a man who just happened upon it. It was his certificates. Anyway, he found it, and he went to Harvard University and said he would burn it up if he didn't get really a ransom. So it went to USC, University of South Carolina, and this woman wrote this biography, and it was the worst piece of garbage I could even imagine. And I say that strongly because she had only spent like a few days at Harvard's library. And she literally said things like in her presentation that passing wasn't that difficult, or, her interpretation, because she had no idea of the subject matter that she was really discussing, no context, that the misrepresentation that she was making were really horrible for the community that she was trying to represent and the person whose legacy that she was setting to put forth. So I just say it's a complicated thing, but I do believe conversations like this are helpful, but the communities will have to also change their diversity.
So that we can continue this discussion this afternoon, we should adjourn for lunch now. I'd like to thank our three panelists for the storytelling and